Every time you look at a billboard, or a magazine cover, or even just a high-end product ad online, you're basically looking at a mathematical lie.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the depth of field in that perfectly crisp photo of a watch, optically impossible. The lighting on the model's face, it literally didn't exist in the studio.
It's all constructed.
Exactly. The skyline stretching out endlessly behind that car. Half of those buildings were hallucinated by an algorithm. So today, we are stepping into the architecture of those beautiful fabrications.
It really is a profound realization when you discover that commercial photography is, well, it's less about capturing a moment and much more about assembling a mosaic of data points, you know?
Right.
You sort of stop seeing a photograph as the static truth and start seeing it as a fluid, editable matrix.
And that transition from trusting the image to manipulating the data is the exact journey we are taking you on today in this deep dive.
Yeah, we're really getting into the mechanics of it.
We are tackling the bridge between knowing what you want an image to look like and actually possessing the technical vocabulary to make the software obey you.
Which is huge for beginners.
Right, so we are breaking down the core design concepts for someone just starting their career. And this is based entirely on Chapter 05, which is brilliantly titled Quick Fixes from an absolute foundational text, Adobe Photoshop CC Classroom, in a book 2018.
It's a classic. I mean, it remains a staple in design education for a very good reason.
Totally.
The fundamental algorithms introduced in the specific era of the software, they really laid the groundwork for all the modern AI-assisted workflows that every major agency relies on today.
Now, before we pull back the curtain on these algorithms, I want to make sure you, our listener, have access to the actual blueprints.
Yes, very important.
You really need to check the description below. You can buy the book by scanning the QR code of the book link provided right there in the show notes. We highly recommend having the text in front of you.
Oh, absolutely. Following the physical or digital text while navigating the interface, it builds muscle memory.
And muscle memory is everything, right?
It's the whole game. In professional design, muscle memory is the difference between struggling with a midnight deadline and just executing a vision effortlessly.
Completely agree. And while you are looking at that description, we explicitly request that you follow the show for more technical design breakdowns and career-building content.
We've got a lot of good stuff planned.
Hit that follow button. We have a massive roadmap of technical deep dives coming up. So, Chapter 05, Quick Fixes.
The infamous quick fixes.
I have to admit, when I first hear the phrase quick fix, it sounds a bit derogatory, like it implies a cheap bandage, shortcut that sacrifices quality.
Sure, yeah. But the book frames this entirely differently. The terminology is almost a misdirection.
How so?
Well, in a high-end professional environment, a quick fix does not mean a sloppy fix. It actually refers to the strategic application of computational power to solve problems that used to take hours of manual labor.
Right, because time is money.
Exactly. If you are a junior designer at an agency, time is quite literally your most expensive resource. You cannot spend 4 hours manually painting out a distracting background element using clone stamps.
Not if the software has a mathematical model that can achieve a superior result in 3 clicks.
Precisely. Mastering the quick fix is about leveraging the software's intelligence so you can preserve your cognitive energy for actual creative decisions.
Makes perfect sense. But we have to prepare our workspace before we start relying on that intelligence, right?
Yeah.
The book gives us a pre-flight checklist.
Yes, definitely.
The very first action it demands before you even open an image is to hold down Ctrl plus Alt plus Shift on Windows or Command plus Option plus Shift on a Mac while launching the application.
Which brings up that little dialog box asking to delete the Photoshop settings file.
Right. It is the ultimate digital palette cleanser. But why is this so critical for a professional workflow? I mean, if I just sit down on my computer, why do I need to nuke my own settings?
Well, if it is purely your personal machine in a vacuum, you might not need to. But the reality of a modern design career is that you are rarely in a vacuum.
You're jumping around.
Exactly. You are sharing agency workstations, you are jumping onto a freelancer's rig, or you're in a shared studio environment. You have absolutely no idea what the designer before you did to the software's engine.
Oh man, they could have messed with everything.
Oh, they do. They might have switched the underlying color profile from sRGB to Adobe RGB, which means every color you see on your monitor is fundamentally misrepresenting what the printer will output.
Which is a nightmare.
A total nightmare. They might have remapped essential keyboard shortcuts or altered the default interpolation algorithms for scaling images.
It's like you're stepping into the cockpit of an airplane, and the pilot before you reverse the throttle and inverted the steering.
That's a perfect analogy.
You don't just take off, you hit the master reset.
Right. Resetting the preferences guarantees a baseline standard. It ensures the software will behave predictably. And in a fast-paced environment, predictability prevents catastrophic output errors.
Okay, so once the workspace is normalized, the book briefly tests our understanding of the environment, specifically the tension between layers and flattened files.
The eternal struggle.
Right, now, anyone opening this software knows the basic concept of layers, just stacking discrete elements on top of each other. But the text highlights a crucial bottleneck that designers hit immediately.
Computational weight versus editability. This is the invisible physics of digital art.
Explain that invisible physics a bit.
So when you look at a layered file, you aren't just looking at a picture. You are looking at a live, unrendered mathematical formula.
Because every layer is distinct data.
Exactly. Every single layer, whether it's a text layer, a color adjustment, or a high-resolution smart object, forces your computer to hold a separate array of data in its active memory, its RAM. So a single 20-megabyte raw photograph, once you add 10 layers of non-destructive edits, becomes a 1.5 gigabyte behemoth. The software has to constantly calculate how light passes through all those stacked matrices in real time.
So the temptation, and honestly, sometimes the necessity when your machine starts lagging, is to just flatten the image.
Yeah, you just collapse it all.
You collapse all those distinct mathematical matrices into a single locked grid of pixels on the background layer. The file size shrinks dramatically, becomes incredibly easy to share with a client.
But you pay a massive price for that convenience. Flattening is a destructive process. The pixels are baked together permanently.
I always think of a layered file like a complex, interactive 3D model. You can walk around it, change the lighting, swap out the materials on the fly.
Yes.
Flattening that file is like taking a Polaroid photograph of that 3D model. Yes, you have a lightweight, easy to pass around print,
Yeah.
but you can never reach into that Polaroid and change the lighting again.
That's exactly it. And the text explicitly mandates a career-saving habit. Duplicate your master layered files before you ever commit to flattening for output.
Because clients always come back.
Always. Clients are notorious for requesting one minor tweak weeks after a project is closed. If you only save the flattened Polaroid, you cannot just adjust the exposure on the subject's face.
You'd have to rebuild it.
You are rebuilding the entire composition from scratch. Storage space is cheap, your time is incredibly expensive. Keep the layered 3D models safe.
Okay, so with our workspace pristine and our master files backed up, we encounter the most common scenario for any working designer: improving a snapshot.
Right, the classic bad photo.
Exactly. A client hands you a photo taken at a corporate retreat in a dark restaurant. It was shot with a basic on-camera flash, it's flawed, and it needs to look like a polished piece of brand collateral by lunch.
And the immediate glaring flaw in that specific lighting scenario is almost always the red eye effect.
We all know what red eye looks like, but the mechanics of why it happens dictate how the software fixes it, right?
Right.
We are dealing with biological optics.
We are. It is a fascinating collision of human anatomy and camera physics.
Walk us through it.
Well, in a dark environment like that corporate retreat, the human pupil dilates widely to allow as much ambient light in as possible.
Right.
When a camera flash fires, it produces an intense, instantaneous burst of light. That light travels faster than the human iris can contract.
Oh, wow. So the eye just can't close fast enough?
Nope. The light enters the dilated pupil, passes through the lens of the eye, and strikes the fundus, which is the interior back surface of the eye.
And that's covered by the retina, right?
Exactly, the retina, which is heavily saturated with blood vessels. The light reflects off that blood-rich tissue and bounces straight back out through the pupil, directly into the camera lens. You are literally photographing the internal vascular structure of the subject's eye.
That is so creepy when you think about it. And for decades, retouchers had to manually paint over this.
It was tedious.
They would zoom in, select a tiny brush, sample a dark gray, and try to painstakingly paint a new pupil while preserving the natural reflection of the room, the catchlight.
Which never looked quite right.
Right. But Photoshop introduced the Red Eye tool, which is tucked quietly behind the spot healing brush. And what I find compelling is that the book doesn't just say, click the eye.
No, it demands precision.
It tells you to navigate to the options bar and set the pupil size to 23% and the darken amount to 62%.
Those numbers are not arbitrary at all. They're very specific instructions for the algorithm.
How does it use those numbers?
So the tool operates by hunting for a specific cluster of high saturation red pixels. The pupil size parameter dictates the radius of its search and replacement operation.
Okay, so what if I leave it at 100%?
If you leave it at 100%, the algorithm might aggressively bleed over the boundaries of the pupil and darken the natural color of the iris. You ruin the eye color. At 23%, it tightly constricts the operation just to the red cluster.
And what about the darken amount? Why 62%?
The darken amount at 62% prevents the dead eye look. If you push that to 100%, the algorithm turns the red pixels into absolute mathematically pure black. Zero luminosity.
Which looks fake.
It looks like a flat, soulless void. Real human pupils are rarely pure black in a photograph. They have subtle tonal variations and ambient light bleeding in.
Right, so 62% retains just enough of the original luminosity data to trick the viewer's brain into perceiving depth.
Exactly. And the text also provides a critical workaround for when the algorithm fails.
Oh, right, because what if the subject is looking slightly off camera?
Right, then the red reflection won't be perfectly centered in the dark pupil. If you just click the dark area, the tool misses the target.
So what's the protocol there?
The protocol is to click the highlight, that tiny white catch light reflected on the moisture of the eye. This gives the software an anchor point to map the geometry of the eye, allowing it to correctly identify and neutralize that off-center red reflection.
Okay, so the demonic glowing eyes are gone. But solving the red eye exposes the second problem with flash photography in dark rooms. The lighting itself is brutal.
Always is.
The flash illuminated the subject's faces harshly, but the background and the edges of the frame are lost in murky darkness. The image completely lacks balance.
It definitely requires brightening and contrast adjustment. Now, the amateur instinct is to reach immediately for the tool labeled brightness contrast.
I mean, it seems logical. I will play the amateur here. It says brightness. It's a slider. I slide it to the right. The image gets brighter.
Yeah.
Why does the book steer us away from this and push us into the curves adjustment layer?
Because the brightness slider is a linear mathematical operation, and light in the real world does not behave linearly.
Explain the difference.
If you use the basic brightness slider, the software just adds a fixed numerical value to every single pixel in the image equally. It pushes your dark shadows toward gray, and it pushes your bright highlights past the threshold of pure white, basically destroying the detail.
You wash out the entire image. You end up with a photo that looks like it was printed on a newspaper that sat in the sun for a week.
Exactly. Curves, however, manipulates the tonal range nonlinearly. When you open the Curves panel, you are looking at a histogram, which is a visual graph of all the pixels in your image, plotted from absolute black on the left to absolute white on the right.
And there's that diagonal line running across it.
Right. By bending that line into a curve, you can selectively target specific tonal ranges. You can tell the software, hey, take the pixels in the midtones and brighten them, but leave the absolute blacks and absolute whites exactly where they are.
It preserves the structural integrity of the image data. Now, the lesson has us initiate this by clicking the Auto button in the Curves panel, but it draws a very sharp distinction between Auto and using a preset from the drop-down menu, like lighter or strong contrast.
The distinction is the presence of dynamic analysis. A preset is essentially a dumb template.
Meaning it doesn't look at the photo.
Right. If you choose the lighter preset, the software applies the exact same curve shape to your image, regardless of what the image actually is. It doesn't care if it's a dark photo of a cave or an overexposed photo of a snowstorm.
But the Auto button is different.
Very different. The Auto button invokes an algorithm that analyzes the specific histogram of your active image. It performs local histogram equalization, looking at where your specific pixels are clustered, and calculates a custom curve designed to maximize the contrast and tonal spread for that unique dataset.
So it builds a custom suit instead of handing you one off the rack.
Beautifully said.
But we don't just rely on the algorithm here either. The text has us refine the curve manually using the on-image adjustment tool.
Yes, that little hand icon.
Right, it looks like a hand with vertical arrows. You activate it, bring your cursor over the subject's physical face in the photo, specifically the forehead, click, and drag upwards.
This really bridges the gap between visual intuition and mathematical manipulation.
How does it know what to adjust?
Well, when you click the forehead, Photoshop identifies the exact luminosity value of that specific pixel and places a control point on the curve. As you drag up, it bends the curve around that specific tonal value.
So you are visually directing the lighting adjustment without having to guess where skin tones fall on a complex mathematical graph.
Exactly. It makes it incredibly intuitive.
So we have neutralized the red eyes and rebalanced the environmental lighting. We have fixed the objective flaws of the camera. But now we transition into a much more complex phase of digital editing.
This is where it gets really fun.
We are moving from fixing lighting to altering structural geometry. We are entering the realm of the face-aware Liquify tool.
This represents a massive leap in computational power. Historically, the Liquify filter was, it was a chaotic grid warping tool.
You just push pixels around with a brush, right?
Yeah, and it was incredibly easy to distort the surrounding pixels, making a face look melted or alien if you weren't extremely careful.
But face-aware Liquify doesn't just see pixels. It recognizes anatomy.
It does. It utilizes machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of faces to identify what computer scientists call facial landmarks.
How detailed is that map?
It maps a 68-point invisible polygon mesh over the eyes, the bridge of the nose, the corners of the mouth, and the curve of the jawline.
Once that mesh is mapped, the interface transforms from a complex painting tool into a dashboard of simple sliders.
Which is much less intimidating.
You expand the Properties panel, and the book directs us to input very precise coordinates. We set eye size to 32, eye height to 10, the smile slider to 5, the jawline to 40, and the face width to 50.
The engineering behind these sliders is remarkable because they maintain the biological plausibility of the face.
Right, it doesn't look like a cartoon.
No, because pushing the jawline slider to 40 doesn't just shave pixels off the side of the chin. It recalculates the entire lower quadrant of the mesh. It simulates the visual effect of the subject tilting their chin slightly down and tightening the jaw muscles.
And the smile slider.
Setting the smile to 5 doesn't stretch the lips into a cartoonish grin. It subtly lifts the orbicularis oris muscle around the mouth and adjusts the microtension in the cheeks. It alters the resting state of the face from neutral to slightly warm.
I noticed a specific UI element next to the eye sliders. A little chain link icon that locks the left eye and right eye values together.
Yeah, the link is enabled by default to enforce mathematical symmetry. If you increase the size of the left eye by 32 units, the right eye scales identically.
To avoid the uncanny valley effect, I assume.
Exactly. The human brain is evolutionarily hardwired to detect facial asymmetry as an anomaly. However, the text points out that you can unlink them for corrective purposes.
Because real faces aren't perfectly symmetrical.
Right. If a subject was photographed outdoors and is squinting one eye against the sun, unlinking allows you to isolate the squinting eye and open it slightly to restore a natural balance.
Now, setting aside the mechanics, let's look at the business application of this. We are fundamentally altering the physical appearance of a human being. A beginner might wonder why a tool this powerful and reality-altering is taught as a standard quick fix.
Well, in the commercial design industry, whether it's advertising, corporate branding, or fashion, the goal of an image is rarely strict photojournalistic truth. The goal is communication.
You are selling a narrative.
You're selling a mood or a brand archetype. Imagine an agency spends $100,000 on a lifestyle campaign shoot. They get the perfect location, the lighting is breathtaking, the wardrobe is flawless. But in the absolute best take of the day, the talent's expression is just a fraction too flat. It lacks the approachability the brand requires. The agency is not going to spend another $100,000 to remount the shoot.
No way.
The designer will open face-aware Liquify and bump the smile slider to 5. It is an economic reality of production. The software protects the investment of the shoot.
But it's not foolproof, is it? The software is only as smart as the data it receives.
Precisely. The limitation of face-aware Liquify is that it entirely depends on the algorithm successfully finding those 68 landmark points.
So what breaks it?
If the subject is photographed in an extreme profile, the algorithm cannot see the far eye or the opposite cheekbone. It fails to build the mesh. If heavy shadows, thick hair, or mirrored sunglasses obscure the geometry of the face, the tool shuts down entirely.
It's the exact same technology and the same limitation as the facial recognition security on a smartphone.
That's a perfect comparison.
If you wear a heavy scarf over your nose, your phone won't unlock because it can't verify the architecture of your face. If Photoshop can't verify the architecture, it locks you out of the sliders and you are forced back into manual pixel-by-pixel manipulation.
Understanding when a tool will fail is a critical part of mastering it. You have to know the boundaries of the automation.
Okay, so we have perfectly tuned the subject's face. The expression is warm, the eyes are bright, but the image still isn't working because the background is a chaotic mess of distracting elements.
The viewer's eye wanders away from our subject.
Right. This leads us to the next critical concept: directing the viewer's attention by manipulating the environment, specifically through the blur gallery.
In physical photography, depth of field is the primary method for guiding the human eye.
Because our brains are lazy.
Optically, our brains naturally gravitate toward the area of highest contrast and sharpest detail in our visual field. Everything soft and out of focus is processed as secondary context.
The project in the text provides a perfect example of this. We have an image of an egret, a bright white bird, standing in tall grass near a pond, with its reflection in the water.
And it's all sharp?
Yeah, the bird is sharp, but the grass and the reflection are also sharp, creating major visual clutter. The goal is to isolate the bird, and the very first step the book outlines is a non-negotiable workflow rule.
Oh, this is so important.
Before you apply a blur, you must convert the image layer into a smart object.
This circles back to the concept of non-destructive editing we discussed with layers.
Tell us why it matters here.
If you apply a blur filter directly to a rasterized pixel layer, the software permanently scrambles the mathematical arrangement of those pixels to create the soft effect. If you save the file, you can never retrieve the sharp grass again. The data is destroyed.
But a smart object changes the architecture of the file.
Yes. When you convert the layer to a smart object, it places your image inside a protective digital container. When you apply the blur, it is applied as a smart filter.
So it's not actually touching the pixels.
The filter operates on the outside of the container. It acts like a piece of frosted glass laid over the image. You can turn the frosted glass off, you can change its opacity, or you can double-click it 3 years later and change the blur radius from 5 pixels to 10 pixels.
And the original razor-sharp image data remains perfectly intact inside the container.
Perfectly intact.
Love that.
Yeah.
With our data protected, we dive into the blur gallery, starting with the iris blur. The interface for this is so tactile. It doesn't use a detached slider menu. It drops a physical overlay right on top of your photograph.
You really interact with the image directly.
You drag the center pin to anchor the blur on the egret's body. Surrounding that pin is an ellipse with 4 handles that let you stretch and rotate the boundary of the sharp area.
And inside that.
Inside that ellipse are 4 feather handles that control the gradient, how abruptly the sharp pixels transition into the blurred pixels, and right in the middle is a focus ring that you literally click and spin to dial in the intensity. The book has us set it to 5 pixels.
The interface design is very intentional. It mimics the physical act of turning the focus ring on a camera lens. You are visually molding the depth of field in real time.
But the iris blur is just one of 5 distinct tools housed within the blur gallery. And the text breaks them down because knowing exactly which physics engine to deploy is what separates a novice from a pro.
Let's decode the gallery. As you said, the iris blur simulates a standard camera lens, creating a traditional shallow depth of field effect.
Okay, what's next?
Then we have the field blur. This is entirely different. It doesn't rely on a central shape. It allows you to drop multiple pins across the image to create a complex topographic map of focus.
So you can have multiple focal points.
Exactly. You can drop a pin on the foreground subject and set the blur to 0. You can drop a pin on a tree 10 feet back and set it to 20. Then drop a pin on a mountain in the distance and set it to 100.
And the software does the math between them.
The algorithm calculates the fluid gradients between those specific anchor points. It is designed for environments with complex, staggered depth.
Third is the tilt-shift blur. This simulates a highly specialized physical tilt-shift lens, where the glass elements of the lens are physically tilted off-axis from the camera sensor.
It creates a narrow band of sharp focus, fading to blur on either side.
The psychological effect of tilt-shift is fascinating to me. If you take a high-angle shot of a real bustling city street and apply a tilt-shift blur, it instantly looks like a macro photograph of a miniature model.
The cars look like plastic toys, the people look like painted figurines.
Why does our brain do that?
It exploits a flaw in human depth perception. Our brains know that in the physical world, only macro photography of very tiny objects placed inches from a lens produces that specific, extreme band of focus.
So we assume it must be tiny.
When you digitally enforce that optical rule onto a massive cityscape, your brain's scale processing breaks down, and it concludes it must be looking at a miniature.
That's wild. Okay, moving on to the fourth tool, the spin blur.
This applies a radial blur measured in degrees. You place the elliptical overlay over the wheel of a static car, dial in the rotation, and it mathematically simulates the motion blur of a tire spinning at 60 miles per hour.
And finally, the path blur.
This is the most computationally intense. You draw vector paths, curves, or straight lines across your image, and the software generates motion blur flowing along those specific trajectories.
It includes parameters for speed, right?
Yes,
Like-
and a critical toggle called centered blur, which ensures the blur shape distributes evenly on both sides of the pixel, maintaining structural stability in the image rather than smearing it entirely off the canvas.
The complexity really deepens when we look at the effects panel within the blur gallery. You can actually simulate strobe lighting.
Yes, using the Motion Effects tab on spin and path blurs. By adjusting the strength and flashes sliders, you command the algorithm to simulate a scenario where a camera shutter is left open while a physical strobe light fires multiple times.
So you get those repeating images.
It leaves distinct frozen instances of the subject repeating along the path of the blur. It is heavily utilized in sports composite photography to show the trajectory of an athlete's movement.
There is also a bokeh tab. Bokeh is the Japanese term for the aesthetic quality of the out-of-focus areas, right?
Correct. In reality, bright points of light like street lamps in the background don't just get mushy when blurred, they expand into overlapping, glowing polygonal orbs defined by the shape of the camera's aperture blades.
And Photoshop can fake that.
The bokeh sliders allow you to mathematically inflate the highlights in your blurred areas to simulate those beautiful optical aberrations.
But the text warns us about a massive trap here. It's an amateur mistake that completely ruins the illusion, and it has to do with the physical texture of photography. Noise.
Oh, this is a masterclass detail.
Walk us through the noise trap.
Every single photograph captured by a physical sensor contains digital noise or film grain. It is a microscopic texture distributed evenly across every pixel. When you apply a digital blur algorithm to an area of an image, the math literally smooths out the pixel variation.
It obliterates the noise.
It totally wipes it out.
So you are left with a background that is silky, perfectly smooth, and almost plasticky, sitting right next to a sharp subject that still possesses all its original gritty digital noise.
It creates a severe textural mismatch. The viewer's conscious mind might not understand why, but their subconscious immediately identifies the image as a composite fake. The environment doesn't match the subject.
So what's the fix?
The solution, which the book highlights, is the Noise tab embedded at the bottom of the blur gallery. You have to use those sliders to synthetically generate and inject digital grain back into the blurred areas.
You just eyeball it.
Yeah, tweaking the amount and size until the texture of the fake blur perfectly matches the organic texture of the original photograph. You are hiding the digital intervention beneath a layer of simulated analog imperfection.
It is brilliant. You break the math to make it look real. There's also an incredible technical note regarding the evolution of mobile photography in this chapter.
Oh, the HEIF files.
Right. It points out that if you were running macOS 10.13 or newer, and you capture an image using the HEIF format, specifically the portrait mode on an iPhone Photoshop, handles the blur entirely differently.
Because an HEI file from a modern multi-lens phone is not just a flat 2D grid of pixels, it contains a Z-axis.
A Z-axis, like depth.
Exactly. The phone uses stereoscopic data from its multiple lenses, or even LiDAR sensors on newer models, to build a literal 3D depth map of the room, recording the exact physical distance of every object from the lens.
That's incredible.
When you load that specific file format into Photoshop's lens blur filter, you don't have to guess or draw pins. The software reads the invisible radar map embedded in the file and applies a physically accurate fall-off of light based on real-world geometry.
It is the perfect marriage of hardware data capture and software rendering.
It really is.
That transitions us beautifully into our next major concept. We've mastered manipulating depth on the Z-axis. Now let's talk about expanding the X and Y axis.
Panoramas.
Yes. Sometimes the physical lens on your camera simply is not wide enough to capture the environment. The client needs a massive sweeping banner of the Seattle skyline, and you only have a standard 50mm lens.
You're stuck.
The solution is taking multiple overlapping photographs and forcing the software to stitch them together into a seamless panorama.
The mechanism for this is the Photo Merge automation tool.
The setup feels simple. You go to File, Automate Photo Merge, and you load in 4 separate photos of the skyline. But the dialog box that appears forces you to make decisions about how the algorithm will interpret the geometry of those photos.
The primary layout option is usually left on auto, but the book points out perspective.
What's the difference?
Auto is highly efficient because it lets the algorithm analyze the images and decide whether to map them on a cylinder or a sphere. But the perspective option is vital for architectural photography.
Because of the straight lines.
Right. When you choose perspective, Photoshop demands that you designate one of the images as the absolute center anchor. It then forcibly warps and bends the surrounding images to align with the vanishing points of that central image.
So it stops things from looking warped.
It prevents buildings from looking like they are leaning or curving around the viewer.
Below those layout options are 4 checkboxes that perform the actual magic of the stitching process. Let's break down the underlying mechanics of these boxes, starting with blend images together.
If you leave this unchecked, Photoshop will literally just align the 4 rectangular photos next to each other.
Which would look terrible.
It would, because lighting and exposure shift slightly between shots. You will see hard, straight lines, seams, where one photo ends and the next begins.
But checking the box fixes it.
By checking blend images together, you activate a seam carving algorithm. The software searches the overlapping data for areas of low contrast. Instead of cutting a straight vertical line, it might snake the seam dynamically around the edge of a cloud, trace the outline of a skyscraper, and weave through the dark water.
By hiding the seam in the natural edges of the environment, the transition becomes mathematically invisible.
Exactly.
Next is vignette removal. What does that do?
Vignetting is an optical flaw where the barrel of a camera lens slightly blocks light from reaching the corners of the sensor, resulting in darkened edges.
So if you stitch 4 photos together,
Those darkened corners become dark vertical bands repeating every few inches across your newly stitched sky.
oh, that would be super obvious.
The vignette removal algorithm calculates the radial drop-off of light in each individual frame and mathematically boosts the exposure in the corners before it attempts the stitch, ensuring a perfectly even tone across the entire panorama.
The third checkbox is geometric distortion.
Similar to vignetting, lenses physically curve the light. This can cause straight lines near the edges of a frame to bow outward. If you try to stitch 2 bowing lines together, they don't lock, they overlap awkwardly.
So it flattens them first.
Yes. This checkbox reads the camera metadata, identifies the specific curvature of the lens used, and applies a counter warp to flatten the geometry before merging.
And the final checkbox, which honestly feels like pure science fiction, is content-aware fill transparent areas.
When the software warps, twists, and aligns 4 separate images to make a panorama, the final resulting composition is never a perfect, clean rectangle.
It's all jagged, right?
The borders look like a jagged staircase, leaving massive areas of empty, transparent canvas at the top and bottom corners. Historically, the only way to get a rectangular image for print was to take the crop tool and shrink the boundaries inward until you cut away all the transparency.
Which meant sacrificing huge portions of the sky and foreground you just worked so hard to stitch together.
It was heartbreaking. But Content-Aware Fill solves this by analyzing the pixel data near the empty edges. It looks at the patterns of the clouds, the texture of the water, and it algorithmically hallucinates new pixels, building an artificial sky and ocean to patch the empty canvas.
Allowing you to maintain the massive, uncompromised borders of the full panorama.
Exactly. It's magic.
The book walks us through completing this process. It yields a massive file with 5 separate layers, 1 for each photo, plus the newly hallucinated borders. We flatten that down and then apply a levels adjustment layer. We grab the white point eyedropper and click on the brightest part of a cloud. And boom. The algorithm instantly recalculates the tonal range based on that white point. The contrast snaps into place and the dull skyline pops into daylight. But here's the catch.
There's always a catch.
The content-aware AI is brilliant, but it is not infallible. Garbage in, garbage out. If you feed the photo merge tool bad data, it will fail catastrophically, creating jagged monstrosities with floating buildings. How does a photographer ensure the software has what it needs?
The software requires strict data consistency. The source text provides 6 golden rules for shooting the source files.
Let's run through them. Rule 1.
1. You must overlap your images by approximately 40%. If you overlap less than that, the feature matching algorithm doesn't have enough common data points to lock the images together.
And if you overlap too much?
If you overlap by 80%, the software gets overwhelmed by redundant data and struggles to map the seams.
Okay, rule 2.
2. Use a single, consistent focal length. Do not touch the zoom ring between shots. If one photo is at 50 millimeters and the next is zoomed to 70 millimeters, the physical scale of the buildings changes and they cannot be stitched.
Rule 3.
3. Keep the camera perfectly level. The ideal method is a tripod with a rotating panoramic head, which spins the camera perfectly on its axis.
Makes sense. Rule 4.
4. If you are forced to shoot handheld, you must become the tripod. Keep your feet planted, hold the camera close to your body, and pivot your torso. A common mistake is walking sideways while taking photos.
Why is that bad?
That induces severe parallax error, where the relative position of foreground and background objects changes, making stitching impossible.
The easiest way to visualize parallax error is to hold your thumb up in front of your face. Close your left eye, then open it, and close your right eye. Your thumb appears to jump side to side relative to the background.
Yes, that's exactly it.
If you walk sideways while shooting a panorama, the buildings jump in the exact same way, and Photoshop cannot align them.
Exactly. Rule number 5. Avoid distortion lenses. Do not try to stitch photos taken with a fisheye lens. The optical warp is too extreme for the algorithms to flatten without destroying resolution.
And the last one, Rule 6.
Rule 6, perhaps the most critical for seamless blending. Lock your exposure. Do not leave the camera on auto exposure.
Because the lighting changes as you pan.
Right. If frame 1 includes the bright sun, the camera will darken the shot. If you pan to frame 4, which is in deep shadow, the camera will aggressively brighten the shot. When Photoshop tries to stitch them, you will have a massive, unfixable line where a dark blue sky meets a blown-out white sky.
So you have to lock the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO for the entire sequence.
Exactly. Prepare the physics correctly, and the software works miracles.
From panoramas, we inevitably run into problems with structural geometry in everyday photography. The book tackles this next, exploring cropping, lenses, and perspective. Let's start with a tilted horizon. You took a great photo of a sailboat, but the ocean looks like it's sliding off the left side of the frame.
We reach for the crop tool, but instead of manually guessing the rotation by dragging the corners, the text introduces the straighten tool, located in the options bar.
It looks like a tiny carpenter's level. You select it, click on the tilted horizon line on the left side of the image, drag a line straight across the water to the right side, and release.
The software instantly recalculates the math and rotates the entire image canvas so that the line you drew is perfectly horizontal.
But this introduces the exact same geometric problem we had with the panorama. When you rotate a rectangle inside a rectangular frame, you create empty, transparent, triangular wedges at all 4 corners.
And the amateur fix is to pull the crop handles inward to cut those empty corners away, which ruins the framing of the shot. You might chop off the top of the sailboat's mast.
So what's the pro move?
The professional workflow is to locate the content-aware checkbox in the crop tool options bar and turn it on before you commit the rotation.
It executes the same hallucination algorithm. It analyzes the ocean and the sky and generates synthetic water and clouds to fill the empty wedges. You keep your entire original composition, the horizon is level, and the corners are perfectly patched.
It's structural duct tape.
But what happens when the lens itself is lying to you? Horizons aren't the only structural flaws.
Right. The text moves us into filter lens correction. We touched on vignetting and geometric distortion earlier, but let's dive deeper into the physics of why a glass lens corrupts an image.
The corruption stems from the physical refraction of light, right?
Exactly. When light passes through curved glass elements to reach a flat digital sensor, anomalies occur. We have barrel distortion, which is incredibly common with wide-angle lenses.
What does that look like?
The field of view is so wide that it has to squeeze the edges of the image into the frame, causing straight lines near the borders, like the edges of a building, to bow outward, like the staves of a wooden barrel.
And the opposite of that.
Conversely, telephoto lenses often cause pincushion distortion, where lines pinch inward toward the center.
Then there's chromatic aberration.
This is a purely optical failure. Different wavelengths of light, say blue light versus red light, bend at slightly different angles when passing through glass. A cheap lens fails to force all those colors to converge perfectly on the exact same pixel on the sensor.
So you get that weird colored glow.
The result is a highly visible, ugly purple or green fringe bordering high contrast edges, like dark tree branches against a bright white sky.
The lesson provides a photograph of a Greek temple to demonstrate this. Because of barrel distortion, the massive stone columns look like they are bending outward, making the temple look structurally unsound, like it's about to collapse backward.
To fix it, we open the lens correction filter. The automation here is staggering. By checking auto-scale image and setting the edge option to transparency, the software takes over.
How does it know how to unwarp it?
It reads the ESIF metadata embedded in the file. It knows that the photographer used a specific 18mm lens from a specific manufacturer. Photoshop references a massive internal database of lens profiles, finds the exact mathematical distortion blueprint for that specific glass, and applies a precise inverse warp to the image grid.
The barrel distortion is neutralized instantly. The columns snap into a perfectly vertical, rigid alignment. The building is mathematically stabilized.
It's a lifesaver.
But here is where we push into truly advanced compositing. What if the distortion isn't caused by the glass, but by the physical location of the camera?
Perspective mismatch.
Imagine a client asks you to composite a photograph of a modern train car into a historical photograph of a train station. But the train car was photographed from a low angle, looking up, while the station was photographed from a high angle, looking down. The vanishing points are entirely different.
If you simply copy and paste the train car into the station, the viewer's brain rejects it immediately. The geometry is violently incompatible. The train will look like it's hovering or sinking into the ground.
So to resolve conflicting camera angles, the text introduces perspective warp.
It is a two-stage operation that forces the software to map 3D space onto a 2D image. Step 1 is layout mode.
In layout mode, the tool provides you with a flexible grid, a quad. You draw this quad over the object you want to alter. Then you manually grab the corners of the grid and align them to the structural lines of the object.
Right, if it's a building, you align the grid to the parallel lines of the roof and the foundation. You might draw one quad for the front wall and pull a second quad out for the side wall, letting them snap together at the corner.
You are explicitly defining the 3D planes of the object for the software's engine.
You're teaching the software the architectural rules of the object. Once the grid is locked, you switch to step 2, warp mode.
Now the behavior of the grid changes entirely. When you grab a corner pin and drag it, you are no longer just stretching a flat graphic.
Because Photoshop now understands the projective geometry of the planes you defined, moving a pin recalculates the entire perspective matrix.
The example in the text uses a long wooden building in a forest. By dragging the pins in warp mode, you can literally pivot the entire building, changing its angle relative to the camera after the photo was taken.
And the detail that is truly mind-bending is how it affects the environment.
Yes.
As you shift the perspective of the building's roof, the trees in the background dynamically warp and stretch to accommodate the new architectural geometry. It isn't just bending the building, it's bending the spatial reality around the building.
It grants a designer the power to rescue and integrate disparate assets. You can harmonize the vanishing points of stock photos that were never meant to exist in the same composition.
It's incredibly powerful.
Which brings us to our final segment of the deep dive. We are calling this Defying Physics.
I like that.
Up until now, we've used quick fixes to repair flaws, red eyes, bad lighting, tilted horizons. Now, we are exploring tools that allow designers to synthesize images that are literally impossible to capture with a single click of a physical camera.
This is where we break the rules of reality.
The first concept is extending depth of field, known as focus stacking. What is the optical barrier we are trying to break here?
The barrier is the diffraction limit of lenses, particularly in macro photography. When you position a camera incredibly close to a subject, whether it's an insect, a diamond ring, or in the book's specific project file, a wine glass sitting on a wooden deck, the physics of the lens dictate that the depth of field collapses.
It gets really thin.
It becomes razor thin, perhaps only a few millimeters deep. A physical camera can focus on the front rim of the wine glass, leaving the back rim and the background beach entirely blurred. Or it can focus on the beach, rendering the entire glass as an unrecognizable blur.
It is optically impossible to capture both planes in sharp focus in a single exposure.
Exactly.
So the production solution is to mount the camera on a heavy tripod and take a sequence of photos, slowly turning the focus ring millimeter by millimeter. One shot for the front rim, one for the middle, one for the back, one for the beach.
You end up with multiple layers of distinct focal slices.
How does the software stitch that depth together?
You select all the layers in the Photoshop Layers panel. First, you execute auto-align layers. Even on a heavy tripod, the mechanical action of turning the focus ring can shift the camera by a microscopic fraction. The algorithm analyzes the pixel structure and perfectly registers the layers over top of each other.
Okay, so they're aligned, then what?
Then you execute auto-blend layers, selecting the stack images parameter and checking seamless tones and colors.
And the math behind this blend is fascinating. How does it know which pixels to keep and which to discard?
It utilizes a local contrast detection algorithm. The software evaluates the micro-contrast of every single pixel across all the layers simultaneously.
Looking for sharpness.
Right. It understands a fundamental law of optics. A pixel that is perfectly in focus will have a high degree of contrast relative to its immediate neighboring pixels. It will have a sharp, defined edge. A pixel that is out of focus will have low contrast. It will be soft and mushy.
So it just throws away the mushy ones.
The algorithm generates complex, highly intricate layer masks, mathematically carving away all the low-contrast, blurry pixels from every layer, leaving only the high-contrast data. It then merges those sharp slices into a single, seamless composite.
The result is an image with infinite depth of field, a wine glass that is perfectly sharp from the front edge to the distant horizon. It is an image that violates the laws of physical optics.
It's stunning when you see it work.
Next, we defy reality through placement, using the Content-Aware Move tool.
This specific tool often elicits gasps from beginners because it feels less like software and more like sorcery.
The lesson file features an egret standing in a pond. The composition is unbalanced. The bird is too far to the right. The assignment is to move the bird to the left.
And with traditional tools, you would cut the bird out, paste it on the left, and then spend hours using the clone stamp to painstakingly rebuild the complex ripples of water where the bird used to be.
But with the Content-Aware Move tool, you simply draw a loose, sloppy lasso selection around the bird, click, and drag it to the new location.
And when you release the mouse, the algorithm initiates two massive computational processes simultaneously. First, it analyzes the lighting, the color, and the water texture of the new destination on the left, and it mathematically blends the edges of the bird into that new environment so it doesn't look pasted. Second, it executes the patch match algorithm on the empty hole left behind on the right side. It scans the surrounding pond, synthesizes the complex texture of the ripples, and seamlessly hallucinates the missing water. It leaves absolutely no trace that the animal was ever standing there.
But the text includes an extra credit section here that elevates the tool's utility. It focuses on transformations. It demonstrates that you can use the tool to copy and extend objects, not just move them.
Yes.
The file is a photo of a thistle plant. You want to thicken the plant by duplicating a stalk.
If you simply copy and paste a distinctive object, the human eye instantly detects the repeating pattern. The brain recognizes the exact same leaf shape appearing twice, and the illusion shatters.
The trick is to draw the selection around the stalk, drag it over. But before you hit enter to commit the move, you invoke the transform controls. You right-click and choose flip horizontal. You scale it down slightly. You rotate it a few degrees.
By altering the geometry before the algorithm blends the pixels, you hack the viewer's pattern recognition. It now looks like a completely organic, distinct stalk growing in a different direction.
Once you commit, the software blends the base of the new stalk into the surrounding grass. You can even adjust the structure and color numerical sliders in the options bar to tighten or loosen how strictly the algorithm matches the surrounding pixels, ensuring a flawless integration.
You are art directing the botany of the scene.
Our final descent into these technical quick fixes addresses a universal nightmare for photographers: camera shake. You are shooting in low light, your shutter speed drops to compensate, and as you press the button, your hand trembles.
The resulting image is universally soft, streaky, and seemingly ruined.
Historically, a motion-blurred image was destined for the trash bin. Standard sharpening tools like unsharp mask only increase contrast along edges.
If the edge is smeared across 20 pixels due to motion, standard sharpening just gives you a highly contrasted, sharp smear. It doesn't fix the motion.
The fix the book details is filter sharpen shake reduction. This is an entirely different category of mathematics.
It is based on forensic deconvolution algorithms. When a camera shakes, it doesn't blur the image randomly. The physical movement of your hand creates a specific geometric path. Perhaps your hand dipped down and to the right, or it jiggled in a tiny microscopic figure 8.
This path is called a blur kernel or a point spread function, right?
Yes. The software analyzes the image, hunting for areas of high contrast, and traces the exact trajectory of the smear. It mathematically maps the shape of your hand's tremble.
Once it calculates that specific blur trace, it performs blind deconvolution. It applies the inverse mathematical function to the entire image matrix, pulling those smeared pixels backward along the exact trajectory of the shake, forcing them to reconverge.
It is the computational equivalent of unscrambling an egg.
The text notes this is particularly revolutionary for illegible text. If you have a blurry photo of a distant street sign, the shake reduction algorithm can often reconverge the smeared edges enough to make the letters readable. It resurrects lost data.
It's incredible for archival or forensic work.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've navigated the chaotic environment of shared workspaces by resetting our preferences. We've weighed the computational cost of layered files against the destructive nature of flattening. We've dissected the biological physics of red eye and the mathematical superiority of curves over linear brightness sliders.
We covered a lot of ground.
We manipulated facial geometry with Liquify, hacked the brain's perception of scale and depth using the blur gallery, and injected synthetic noise to hide our tracks. We forced algorithms to hallucinate missing borders for panoramas, neutralized the physical refraction of curved glass lenses, warped 3D perspective in a 2D space, bypass optical diffraction limits via focus stacking, and unscrambled motion blur.
It is an overwhelming arsenal of capability, specifically engineered to remove friction from the creative process.
And that brings us back to the core thesis. For a beginner stepping into this industry, quick fixes are not a sign of laziness.
Not at all.
They are the language of efficiency. They are incredibly sophisticated AI-driven accelerators that separate the slow amateur from the highly profitable professional.
If there is a broader understanding to take away from this specific chapter, it is the realization of what a digital image actually is today. When you rely on content-aware fill to generate a skyline that never existed, when you use a mesh algorithm to alter the anatomy of a smile, or when you synthesize a depth of field that no physical glass could ever capture.
You're no longer just editing a photograph.
Exactly. You are painting with data.
Yeah.
You are manipulating mathematical models. As you advance in your career, remember that this software isn't just a tool for fixing reality. It is a platform for authoring it entirely.
That is a phenomenal shift in perspective. You are building the illusion. Remember, you can dive into this architecture yourself. Check the show notes in the description below to find the QR code to purchase Adobe Photoshop CC Classroom in a book 2018.
Scan it, get the book, and start practicing.
Instruct the listener that they can buy the book by scanning the QR code of the book link provided in the description below. And please, hit follow on this deep dive. We explicitly request the audience to follow for more technical design breakdowns and career-building content.
We have so much more to decode.
We love decoding this complex machinery. Thank you for diving deep with us today, and until next time, keep creating. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.